Well, today I got some pretty exciting changes that I want to show you related to my off-grid emergency backup power system. I've got it to a point now where I don't really need a large gas-powered generator anymore. And I now have the option to go partially off-grid when I need to. The emergency power transfer switch over here has been upgraded, and I've incorporated this battery that I've had for a while, and I've made some changes to my solar array so that I can just capture more sun earlier in the day and later in the day. And tying everything together is this SunGoldPower 10 kilowatt split phased solar inverter. So it's a nice hybrid inverter and has a lot of functionality in here that I've been experimenting with all the operating modes that I can fully program here in this inverter. I can take all of these input power sources and decide when I want to use them. So I can set it up so that it automatically switches to backup power if the grid goes down, go completely off grid if I want, and I also have this hybrid functionality that allow me to combine those things and decide when and how I want to use each power source, whether that's a grid power source or solar. I can make solar priority. I can also decide when and how much to charge my batteries and from what source. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this guy, and because it's a split phase inverter, I can now do 240 volts, where before I could only do 120 volts AC in single phase. So let me show you how it all works, and maybe it'll give you some ideas for something you can do on your own project. So I thought I'd start out by sharing what my goals for this system are. I know we all have different needs and goals, you know, whether you're doing a shed or a tiny home or even an RV or just a backup power system for your home or shop like I am. I've been using this generator backup system, using a gas power generator for, I don't know, over a decade, and it's been working fine. But yeah, every time you fire up that generator, you're like, oh, this is kind of a pain to set it up and tear it down when you're all done. And I've always wanted something more automatic. And you know, since we've been working with solar more with the RV, we're used to living off grid when we're traveling in the RV. I wanted to implement something similar here when we're not traveling in the RV. We wanted to be able to provide backup power to the shop here and some critical circuits in the house if the grid goes down, power goes out for whatever reason. And I also wanted to have the option to utilize some of the solar that I've installed here on the shop, because I've had extra solar panels that I got for my RV solar project, and I created a little array that I've been using. And you know, when it's sunny out, I want to be able to make use of that, whether I'm fully off grid or not. It just seems like it's a waste if the sun's shining on them and you're not utilizing that power in some way. And lastly, you know, I wanted to have the option to go off grid if I wanted to, and now I do. So those are my primary drivers for the system. One thing I will point out is that this setup, it does not backfeed the grid. So it's not like your typical grid-tied solar system that you see on most residential houses. This is something completely separate. It's pretty much set up like a backup emergency power system with options. So I hope that makes sense, and let's go ahead and dig into some of these components, what's been upgraded, and then we'll show you how it's all connected together, and then we'll do some testing, demonstrate some of these cool operating modes that this inverter supports. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is this emergency transfer switch, but it's really not one big transfer switch. It's 10 individual transfer switches. Each one has three positions actually. The up position is the generator, or in my case, inverter, is going to be powering this. And the middle position, I'll just turn this one off. This is the lights here in the shop. The middle position is off, And then bottom, if I have it switched down, it's being powered from grid power. So everything's connected here through those circuits on the main service panel. So I'm going to switch this back to inverter right now. And each circuit has its own circuit breaker and rating when it's being powered through this generator or inverter source. When it's on grid power, it uses the breaker that's in the panel here. So I got 10 circuits here. Some of these have different ratings, like these are 20 amp and these are 15 amp circuits, and the one on the bottom here is a 30 amp circuit. And I have those tied together, so it's similar to a dual pole breaker that you'll have here in your service panel. But this one's my water heater that I have powered through the inverter right now, and the water heater takes 240 volts, so it needs to get power from both sides, both legs of the system. So each side of these is tied to either leg 1 or leg 2, just like the main service panel is. The original one I had that I've been using forever is a 30 amp panel. And it worked great, but it was only a single phase, so I wasn't able to get 240 volts out of it. This 50 amp model of this panel, it can do 240 volts now, and it also has larger wiring inside, so a thicker gauge wire inside, so it can just carry more current. Oh, the last thing I upgraded on this, which I did on the other one too, was to replace the kind of the analog power gauges with these digital meters that show my power output. They also show an accumulation of kilowatt hours, voltage, frequency, and a few other things. So yeah, very handy to see this stuff on both sides and know that I have a pretty precise reading coming out of there. So the solar PV input comes into this panel here from the roof. And I've got 4 solar panels right now, and they're 435 watt solar panels, and I got them as spares when I did my RV solar project, which also has 4 of these on the roof of the RV. So they've just been in storage, and I thought I need to be using these instead of just having them sitting doing nothing. So they're mounted up here, and since they put out a lot of voltage, each panel can put out on average about 80 volts or so. I've split them into 2 pairs. So each pair, which is wired in series, can now put out about 160 volts on average. And the current's pretty low. It's maybe about 10 to 15 amps max for each string. So that's why I have 2 strings here. I got an A and a B. And what I've done recently is actually combine these into 1 string now. And I did that in here. If we look inside here, I have a combiner box back in here, so I can make all these changes and connections back here without having to redo everything up on the roof. So each string now is parallel together, so I guess it's like a series parallel configuration. I can up the voltage. And the reason I did that is because this inverter now can accept up to 500 volts of PV input. So that doubles my voltage, which means that the MPPTs will kick in a little bit sooner in the day as the sun's low, and they'll keep collecting and engaging the MPPT controllers later in the day too. So the hope is that it's going to expand my solar peak window there throughout the day, and just be able to produce a little bit more energy throughout the entire day. And if I did need to change it back, say if I'm needing to power like a power station or something that might be limited to 150 volts, I can always make that change here and just separate them again, and then I'll be good to go. Now the battery that I'm using for this setup is this fairly large 14 kilowatt lithium iron phosphate 48 volt battery from BigBattery. I believe this is their original Rhino battery. There's a newer version now called the Rhino 2 that's improved, but this is the original one. I've had it since like 2022, and it's been working really well. I like the form factor and the fact that I can mount it on the wall even though it's really heavy. So it took me a while to figure out how I wanted to do that because it's 380 pounds. Yeah, pretty heavy. It also has a T-fuse built in here, and yeah, it's just been a decent battery for what I need. And of course, you could use any 48-volt battery that you want, even a rack-mounted setup. Yeah, there's just a lot of battery options available these days. All right, now that brings us to the inverter. This is a SunGoldPower 10 kilowatt, split phase, 48 volts, solar hybrid power inverter. It's just one of these all-in-one inverters that can take inputs from solar, grid power, battery, and give you lots of ways to combine and configure how those inputs are used to power your outputs and charge the battery. So we'll crack this open here in a minute, but the power of this inverter is that, like I said, it's that hybrid functionality to be able to fully program how you use all of these different power inputs. And one other feature that it has is the ability to set timers on, when to switch over to solar, when to use battery power, when to switch back to grid, which is very useful for, folks who live in power districts that, they have sliding rates for, how much a kilowatt hour costs at, peak times of day and all that stuff. So there's just a lot of features in here that I'm not going to cover them all, but I do want to show you how we're using it, and hopefully that's going to be helpful. We also get a, right here, let me show it to you. Up here, I just mounted it up here, but it's a Wi-Fi module that allows us to connect the inverter to Wi-Fi, and there's an app you can download and monitor and also set parameters through the app, and it's very helpful. All right, let's take a look at what we got hooked up here from left to right. Now, as we go through this setup, I thought it'd be pretty helpful to have a diagram that shows how everything is kind of connected together. It shows all the different components, all the connections, and I've also included links to all the major components and wiring and some of those key things you might need if you want to take on a project like this on your own. So just head over to rvwithtito.com/downloads and you'll see where you can download this. And it might be pretty good to have a copy of this handy as we go through this. It'll probably be very helpful and make more sense to you. But yeah, I keep this right here with the inverter, and it also details my startup and shutdown procedure as well, which is just good to have in case you forget something or if somebody else needs to reference it as well. All right, let's take a look at what we got hooked up here from left to right. On the left side, we've got our AC input. So this is our AC, our 50 amp, 120 volt split phase coming in from the grid. So it comes in through here because I have it connected to this 240 volt outlet, which I also can disconnect and use to plug in an RV or something like that. So it comes in through here, through this cable, and that's connected to my AC in. So I've got line 1, line 2, which is red, my neutral, and my ground. And just so you know, the neutral and the ground are not bonded inside the inverter by default. You can set that to be bonded through, I think it's setting number 63. But right now, by default, it's not connected in the inverter because it's bonded in the main service panel, which is how you want this set up, kind of like a sub panel. All right, so next to that we have our AC output, and this is what feeds our transfer switch over there, so that feeds all of the other circuits, and it's the output for the inverter. So we have our L1, L2, neutral, and ground, and you can see here it comes out here, and it goes into the wall, and it goes all the way over there behind the wall to the transfer switch. Next to that, in here we have our communications and our relays. And here we have our battery connections, starting with this right side, which I've marked with some red electrical tape because I just like to be reminded to protect myself from myself that this is the positive side so I don't swap them. So this is the positive side and this is the negative battery terminal. You can see the number 2 cable that goes through here and goes here to the battery. What else? Oh yeah, we got our PV inputs here. So we got PV1, which is our positive and negative here, and we have PV2, which is next to it. You can see we're only using one of the MPPTs, and the second one is not hooked up, but I have it here just in case I wanted to use it. Right, it's not powered right now because there's nothing connected to it in the PV box up there. I have everything paralleled into PV1 only. So that's pretty much it. We have our on-off switch under here, and I switch that to off, and that's all there is to it, really. I added this this wire trough here just to clean everything up, and it's been working really well. This particular one didn't really come with knockout holes, so I had to drill those using a stepping drill bit, and worked out really well. I just keep this closed up, and I added this sticker here to let me know that, or others, that, you know, turn off the PV input before you start messing around in here. And the same is true for this access panel here. Slide it in, pop it in, and it's got some screws here, but typically I leave them off because I take this off periodically. And I added these stickers just to let folks know that there are multiple sources of power in here, so it's more than one disconnect switch. All right, now we can go ahead and bring the system back online. I'm going to start by turning the battery on. It's going to go to the BMS here, and with the battery on, I can go ahead and turn on the inverter. It has some source of power. Okay, it's coming alive. Turn on the AC input. Turn on the breaker here. And we'll flip the breaker on this side for the AC input. And we should see it pop up here. So we can see that we have AC output going to the transfer switch, but there's really nothing being powered right now because there's no load. So we have all the transfer switches right now set to go be powered from the grid. So let's switch them over to inverter power. And finally, if we're ready for it, we can just switch on our solar inputs here. All right, now we can see quite a bit of information here on the display of the inverter. Now it's separated into these pages, so it's got like 5 or so different pages of information, and each one shows you something a little different. But in general, the layout is based on these power inputs. So on the lower left, we see we got battery, and upper left, we've got our PV input. Upper right, we've got our grid, and the output is this little house icon on the lower right. So we've got little lines that show where the power is actually coming from and going. Right now it's coming from the PV, and from what I can tell, yeah, our battery's full right now, so the basically the battery and the PV are going to supply the loads. And on this first page, we're looking at voltage. So we can see here on the upper left, it's toggling between the two PV sources. Right now it shows 307 or so volts coming from the one that we have connected, and the other one's set to 0. 122 volts available on the grid right now, and our battery voltage right now is sitting at 54.9, almost 55 volts. And our output is at 120 volts AC. So if we go to the next page, it shows us amps or current. So it's toggling here on the PV between 1.4 amps. We don't have a huge load right now. And the other one is 0. So nothing flowing from the grid and nothing going to the battery or coming from the battery. It's just being maintained. And our output is roughly about 3 amps at 120 volts AC. So if we go to the next one, it's going to show us our power, so basically in watts. The same information essentially, just in a different unit. So now we're looking at kilowatts. We've got 0.5 kilowatts right now, about 500 watts coming in from solar, and still showing volts on the battery, and 0.3 kilowatts right now is our load, so about 300 watts. And that's pretty much all I need to look at usually here. We get into this more, it starts to show us just some of the internal settings. So right now it's set up to 60 hertz on the AC outputs, and shows us our 500 volt input limit on the PV. That's what its limits are, and we're looking at a 48 volt battery and 10 kilowatt output maximum. Primarily, I'm only looking at the first 2 or 3 screens. And all of this information is also available on the app. So setting up the Wi-Fi in the app is actually pretty straightforward. You just pretty much follow the instructions. You have to download the app, and then you have to create an account. And once you have the app up and running on your mobile device, then you just add a device, which is basically the inverter, and actually it's the Wi-Fi logger, I think they call it, and you scan this QR code that's on here, and then it takes you through this whole registration process for this. And then once it's all set up, then you can pull up the status and all this information from the inverter through the app, and it's pretty useful. I use it a lot when I'm just kind of keeping an eye on things and making some small changes in the settings. And an explanation of all these settings is here in the user manual, so you just need to read through those and see which ones apply to you. Things are laid out a little bit differently, and it's actually a little bit more self-explanatory in the app. They got slightly more user-friendly names, and things are grouped, by section, as opposed to just kind of going through all these different settings that you don't know what this 3-letter thing means. So you'd have to refer to the user manual all the time. But doing it from the app here actually is probably a little bit easier. The way that I prefer to have it set up right now, which is pretty much a hands-off setting for me. I don't have to worry about whether my battery's getting low or if I've had a few cloudy days and I need to manage my power a little bit. I just wanted to just work and have the grid kick in and recharge things just to keep things in good shape and use as much solar as is available. But to do that, I have it set to solar priority on my AC output mode, and then on my battery charge mode, it's set to CSO. So what that means is that the battery is going to be charged whenever the solar drops off. During the day, it uses the solar that's available, and at night, it switches to grid, and if the battery needs to be recharged up to 100%, it does that using the grid power, and in the next day, when the solar kicks on again, then it uses solar again to power loads and do all these things, charge battery if it has residual remaining, and then the grid kicks in to help if it needs to. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to set this up depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. So we've got our solar coming in, we've got battery power, and we've got grid power coming in. All three power sources coming into the inverter. Now what's really cool about this is that is how it manages all of those power inputs as they start dropping off and coming back on again. So let's simulate some of these situations and see how it handles it. Because our goal is just to have the power on all the time, regardless of what power source is available at the time. So right now everything is powered. You know, the whole transfer switch panel is all powered up. We're just going to start turning off our power sources and see what happens. Let's start with a grid failure and we'll watch and see how it handles it. We'll kill our grid input. Okay, no change. The lights are still on, no flicker. Oops. So let's go ahead and kill the solar input. Just flick this switch up here. Okay. No more solar. Beep. Again, no change in our power output at this point. It's just being powered solely from the batteries. Now let's turn the grid back on and let's switch the batteries off to kind of simulate what would happen if our battery completely dies. So let's go ahead and do that. Bring the grid back up. It's just available now. And our solar is still off too. So we'll leave the solar off. The grid is sitting there as a backup. And we're going to go ahead and take the batteries down. Okay, batteries off. See that the grid has kicked in and is supplying power to the load. There's nothing happening in the battery. It's still kind of draining. You can see the power is really low. But yeah, works pretty good. Turn the battery back on again. We have it set to automatically use the grid if the PV is down. So let's turn the PV back on. So our solar should go beep. There it is. And the grid has dropped off. So now we got just our PV and our battery power that's powering everything right now. So it's working the way that I have it set up to work, and it's what I wanted. Well, I've been using this system for about 6 weeks or so, maybe a little longer. I initially tried out that pseudo off-grid mode, which was working fine. I just found myself managing my power loads a little bit more and really excessively monitoring things, and when it was cloudy I would kind of shift some loads around. I then switched to this more hybrid mode that would just still maximize my solar that I have, but getting some extra help from the grid primarily at night, and keeping my battery charged up in case there was a power failure, which did happen a couple times while I was testing this system out. You know, our power went down for, you know, several hours and we didn't even know. It didn't even affect us at all. We didn't know until we saw some of the neighbors running around like, what's going on? But yeah, our power stayed up, you know, except for the things that we don't have through that emergency system, like our furnace and our kitchen range and oven. And that's pretty much it. Everything else is being powered through this setup. All the lights, all the plugs, all of the refrigerator, everything in the kitchen besides the range and the oven. With this split phase capability, I'm able to get 240 volts and power the water heater, which draws a little over like 5,000 watts, so 5,500 watts. That kicks in. You can hear the fans going when that happens, but for the most part, it's also very quiet. Everything winds down in terms of the fans when it's not drawing heavy load or charging with a lot of solar. It just shuts down and you can't hear it at all. Even when it's running, it's not incredibly loud. So I'm pretty happy about just having it right here and everything being on the wall and It just works. I have one question for you though. Could I call this system a solar generator? Let me know in the comments, and I'll talk to you later, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.